Now, I hope that Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Cabinet Minister and the Tory MP for North East Somerset, and my fellow GB News presenter, joins me now. Jacob, good morning. Lovely to see you on the Sabbath. Now, let's talk about this 30% swing in your neighbouring seats, Somerton and Frome. You must be worried you're going to lose your seat, Jacob. What's your majority these days? After the boundary review, about 16,000. You're on the borderline here.
Yes, that's right. I think there's a very interesting and important piece in the Sunday Times by Peter Kellner, which looks at turnouts in the by-elections we've just had and turnouts in by-elections 92 to 97. If you look at the Lib Dem vote in Somerton and Frome, it's actually lower than they achieved in any election from 1997 to 2010. In 2010, they peaked at 28,000, and they got 21,000 in this election. The turnout, 92 to 97, averaged 70-ish%. Here it was about 45%.
Yes.
And it does seem as if Tories just stayed at home. Now, can we persuade Tories to go out to vote in the next general election? And here I think Uxbridge is really interesting and important, because if we get rid of things like ULEZ, which have popped up across the country, and we show we're on the side of the British voter, we stop burdening them with extra charges, extra regulations, extra interference in their life, then I think there's a real chance.
Jacob, this is top spinning from you, if I may say, because John Curtis, the pollster, has pointed out that actually, if you look at the by-election results as a whole, it represents a 21-point drop in the Conservative Party's support since the 2019 election. So there's no way that you can say that this is a good result for the Tories. It bodes very, very badly for the general election.
I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it indicates a chance of hope.
Okay.
And I'd point out that between 1987 to 1992, the Tories lost by-elections on huge swings. And then in 1992, we won every single seat that we'd lost at a by-election back. So by-elections don't necessarily predict what's going to happen in a general election. They do give an opportunity for governments to think about what they're doing and to see what works and what doesn't. What works is getting rid of unpopular, expensive green policies. And that's a real opportunity for us. We've got an energy bill before Parliament at the moment, which will pile endless costs on British consumers and businesses. We don't want to do that.
But then you've said about how, I think you said after the by-election result came through on Friday morning, it's really important that Tory MPs like me row in behind the Prime Minister, but you don't back a load of his policies. You don't back net zero.
Well,
you've argued about the retention of EU law bill being destroyed. You've also talked against corporation tax hikes. You've talked against his tax hikes. So you were a strident critic of Rishi Sunak, and now you're sucking up to him. Why is that? Desperation?
No, I'm supporting him as Prime Minister, but backbench MPs have to talk about policy and the way policy ought to be going. That's part of our role. It's part of our role of holding the government to account. But I'm supporting him as an individual, as the leader of the party, as the Prime Minister, to carry on being Prime Minister. I think that's very important. I think there is no prospect for the Tory party in changing leader. But these by-elections have shown us something very clearly, and that is we can win if we do things that are sensible and popular. And the Prime Minister is being absolutely excellent on the whole affair around Nigel Farage and the banks. Very clear, very straightforward, and we are not going to have a culture where, in the name of diversity and inclusion, you have your bank account closed.
We'll have a conversation about the banking situation in just a moment, but just on these policies that the Tories should therefore dump. Should he dump the net zero pledge? Should he dump the ban on petrol and diesel cars?
Well, I would certainly get rid of the pledge to get rid of petrol cars in 2030. That was done a few years ago in different circumstances. I would get rid of the plans in the energy bill to put extra charges on people and have extra certificates for people selling their houses, owning property, and so on. I would get rid of things that apply direct costs. Having a long-term ambition for net zero is different and working towards it, but we need to think about what other countries are doing, what is proportionate and what is affordable.
And on tax, Jacob, I've got one of my People's panellists today, Carl, saying, when will the government bring taxes down? I mean, it's a fair question that many, many people watching and listening to this want to know, and yet still we have prevarication from the Chancellor and the Prime Minister on this.
Well, no Chancellor or Prime Minister will ever say what taxes will be changed before a budget. You know that perfectly well. That's not prevarication, that's just the prudence of government. We've got to get spending down. And you were also talking to your People's Panel, the wisdom of the viewers of GB News, about HS2.
Yeah.
Why don't we get rid of HS2? Get away from the sunk cost fallacy, stop it now, save that money. I would personally be strongly in favour of getting rid of inheritance tax and doing that before an election.
Hang on, Jacob.
Because it's a tax that's...
You're meant to be supporting Sunak, and now you're trying to drive a steamroller through two of his main policies. The government supports continuing HS2.
No, I'm not. No. Yeah, but this isn't driving a steamroller through his policies. It's making points about policies that don't epitomise Rishi Sunak, do they? That he is not somebody who has ever stood up, as far as I'm aware, and said HS2 is the best thing since sliced bread. Nor has he said that inheritance tax, death duty, is one of the most important taxes that he really, really likes. What I'm doing is talking about policies in the perfectly normal way for backbenchers to do.
But I suppose from the audience's perspective, right, that the way they see it is this, and lots of people say this to me, you don't seem to agree because you're on the right of the party with a lot of your own government's policies. You're more aligned almost with what Nigel Farage and others are saying. Why don't you and people on the right just form a breakaway party that actually pursues conservative policies? You know, it's really hard for you. I feel sorry for you because you're having to come on here and justify policies that you simply don't agree with, and you're not proving popular at the ballot box because Tory voters don't agree with them either.
Well, it worked in Uxbridge because we were doing things that were popular and the sort of things that I'm talking about. The Tory party is my party. There's no way I would leave the Tory party. And it's always been a coalition. There have always been elements of the party that have wanted to go faster or slower. And that's the nature of our politics with a two-party system. Some countries have coalitions, and see the elections in Spain today, that are outside an individual party structure. We have coalitions within the Conservative Party and the Labour Party that lead to a government where nobody gets everything they like. That's always the way of politics, but that enough of it is what you like that you can support it as an entity, and that's certainly my position. And as I say, I support the Prime Minister strongly personally. Of course, there are some policies that I would encourage him to change, but the lesson of Uxbridge is that there are things we can change that will be electorally successful, and that's what's so fundamentally important. And they're in areas where I don't think the Prime Minister would be strongly opposed to what I'm saying, that if you look at his speeches over the years, his policy interests, he's never been a rabid net zeroite, has he?
No, that's right. But I'm afraid the government has the aura of being rabidly net zero. Let's move on to the banking thing, because I know that you did briefly touch on this when you wrote your Sunday Express column, which is in today's paper. Should the BBC apologise to Nigel Farage? It seems remarkable, doesn't it, that Simon Jack, the business editor there, doesn't seem to want to take responsibility for a badly sourced and incorrect story. Well,
we don't know whether it was badly sourced, do we? We now know that it was incorrect. But it may have been impeccably sourced. That it seems, and I hope she will come out and deny this, that the source comes from the chief executive of NatWest. Now, if you're the BBC and you get a story of that kind from the top of NatWest, you think it's true, and that's perfectly reasonable to have broadcast it then. Now it turns out it was untrue, and this leaves two questions. One, yes, of course the BBC should apologise when it gets a story wrong, but more importantly, the chief executive of NatWest, if she has broken the absolute code that bankers are discreet about their clients, if she's broken that, she must not remain a senior banker. She must resign.
She must resign. But how will we ever find that out?
She must.
Does Simon Jack need to oust his source?
No, of course not. You would never ask a fellow journalist to do that, and nor would I as a politician. She will know whether she's done it or not, and she must deny it if she hasn't, because otherwise it leaves an intolerable suspicion over her. And it's really important. Public figures know that a lot of what they say will be leaked and will be briefed, but we ought to be able to speak to our doctor and our bank manager in confidence.